Welcome to the Mullen Automotive Museum. My name is Rick Eberst. I'm a docent here, been here about 10 years. And today we're going to be looking at a Bugatti, a 1994 Bugatti EB110 SS. And before we start, I'd like to just maybe share a little bit about Bugatti and the Bugatti company in general. And it's really nice because I'm surrounded by Bugattis right here today, and I feel full of joy. In fact, I think I'm French today. Anyway, Ettore Bugatti started his company in 1908, and he was only 28 when he started this company. And he and his son eventually made about 8,000 cars, all basically out of Molsheim, France, which was sometimes Germany and sometimes France, based upon who was in charge of winning the wars at those times. So what he did, he created these really wonderful sports cars, racing cars, and sold them to the greatest car aficionados in the world. Just to give you an idea of how precise Ettore Bugatti was, he designed everything in his factory, and one of the things he designed were the doors that went into the factory, and they all had brass hinges that were actually designed by his son, Rembrandt Bugatti, who was a very famous sculptor. And Ettore was so precise that he would have these hinges polished every day just so they'd look beautiful. Now think of what he would do with his cars if he had that much detail and interest in presenting and showing people just the mere hinges on the doors of his factory. So what we're going to do is go on and move from looking at some of the cars we have here. By the way, we do have the largest collection, a private collection of Bugattis in the world. We have about 50. The only larger collection is the French National Automotive Museum in Mulhouse, France. And you would think that they might have the most cars, the most Bugattis in the world. So what we're going to do is take a look at our 1994 EB110 Super Sport, which was built actually in Italy. So we'll focus on that and hopefully take you in depth, and you'll be able to see some of the details of that wonderful car. So what you see in front of you is actually one of basically 5 different models that they had for this car. This one is the SS. The first car that came out was the GT. And the GT was unbelievable in terms of how they generated. It had entire carbon fiber chassis. It had a carbon fiber body. It had an engine that was a world-class engine that produced about 560 horsepower, and it was able to do 200 miles an hour. Well, we'd like to open the door in this car so you can see the inside. It's as you can see, a scissors door. You see some of these on other cars like Lamborghini. One thing I might mention about the car is that the front wheels are very enclosed, so there's very little foot room in here. But if you take a close look at the inside, you can see the inside of this car on the SS is much more functional in nature. For example, the dash on all the other GTs were wood. This one is carbon fiber. The entire door panels, the inside tunnel covers are very, very light and very, very functional. If you look carefully, you can see some gauges here. You have a tach in front of you, speedometer, fuel gauge. Very basic car. They did have air conditioning, but very few other kind of features. The seat actually just moves up and back, and on the GT there was a 6-way adjustable seat. Overall, this was all done to save about 330 pounds. Another interesting feature of the car is the glove box does not have a door on it. It's designed, of course, to keep the weight down. The other GT version had a beautiful door in the front of it. This one, if you look over in the dash, you can see the carbon fiber, air conditioning vents, pretty basic radio. Nothing super over the top in terms of luxurious accommodations. The seats are very supportive. And also, for me, I'm a tall guy, there's a little bit of a head indentation up here so that I have more room. And on the top, there's 5 different switches that work the lights and a variety of other elements. There's a place to open up your gas tank filler, too. And it appears this car is still under warranty. It only has 375 miles on it. I wish I'd put all 375 miles on this car. Again, 6-speed transmission. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 reverses over and back to the right. Small steering wheel, but yet accommodating in terms of features. and it works quite well. The seats in this car all have a carbon fiber shell with a Portola Frau leather interior. Portola Frau is a company that makes very high-end Italian furniture, and they did the interior in the GT, and they did the interior in this car. But the leather is just basically in the exposed parts where a person's body would be in contact with the carbon fiber shell around it. Allow me to close the door here on our beautiful EB110 SS. And we have two special treats now. One is we're going to open the hood so you can see the engine on this lovely car, the 12-cylinder, 4-turbocharged engine, 3.5 liter. One of my colleagues and fellow docents here at the Muller Museum, Ken Sachs, is going to join us. And Ken's an expert on engines, and he's going to share some real interesting details about the engine on our EB110 and compare it to some of the other cars at the time.
Yes, as you pointed out, this is a 3.5-liter V12, 4 turbochargers, 5 valves per cylinder, so a total of 60 valves. This particular engine was modified with a larger induction system and slightly larger turbochargers, so we're actually at 700 horsepower here at 8,250 RPM. 4-wheel drive, 6-speed manual transmission. And I wanted to compare it with some of the other supercars of this era. And one of them, of course, would be the McLaren F1, which is quite famous for being a 3-passenger car. Driver sits in the center. It had an engine developed with the cooperation of BMW, 4-liter V12 again, making about 512 horsepower at 8,000 RPM. Another 5-valve engine. And 6-speed, rear-wheel drive on it. But as we know, they were quite potent automobiles. And the other one I wanted to talk about today, being a Ferrari fan.
Surprise, surprise.
There you go. Is the Ferrari F50, which was developed in a similar time period to the EB110. And again, it's a V12. It is naturally aspirated and 4.7 liters. And it too has 5 valves per cylinder. There seems to be a theme there with the 5 valves. 512 horsepower at 8,000 RPM. 6-speed manual, of course, in the Ferrari. And rear-wheel drive only. So some interesting comparisons.
Sure. So tell me about the 5 valves. You know, I mean, what's the intake? What's the exhaust? How does that all work?
Well, typically they'll run 3 intake and 2 exhaust. The intake air is denser than the exhaust, so using more valves allows more surface area to get the fuel charge into the cylinders. And once we've burnt the majority of it, we hope, then it's easier to exhaust out of the two valves. So that's typically the arrangement.
And you said the SS runs like at 8,200 RPMs?
8,250, I believe.
Wow. Yeah. With 60 valves, there's got to be a lot of action going on.
There's a lot of commotion going on when these engines are up at their top RPM ranges.
Wow. Well, Ken, thanks so much for coming in today and helping us out, you know, and better understanding the mechanical aspects of the engine of this car. And hope that you'll come back and join us again in the future.
Well, you're very welcome. It's always a pleasure to be here at the Mullen Automotive Museum.
We just love it here, don't we? It's great. Yeah, we're really privileged. Thanks again. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, let's pay a little bit more attention specifically to this car. As I mentioned, there were several different models of the EB110 that were produced. You had the GT, or the Gran Turismo, which was the first car that came out. They also then came out with the SS. They had 3 race cars. They also made a right-hand drive car. They made a car just for America, and they made a car for the Middle East. So this car is basically a car that's the SS. And SS, by the way, doesn't stand, many people think it stands for Super Sport. We use that term. But it actually was called Super Strada, or Super Road Car. And the idea was that Artioli had for this car was it was supposed to be a more functional car that maybe the owner would abuse a little bit and put through his paces a little bit more. So this, as Ken said, had a about another 50 or 60 horsepower, and it also weighed about 330 pounds less than the other cars in terms of the GT. So let's start back here in the back. The wing on the original GT was on a hydraulic system that would go up and down, and it had a sensor in it based upon the speed you were going. So if you look at the new Bugatti Veyrons now and the Seyrones, they have a lot of little adjustments that happen back here mechanically. And that was true on the GT. On the SS version, this one, if we look closely underneath here, you can see has bolts on the side of it, and it is bolted in position. Now, you can imagine that this engine this size is going to do, and the goal was to do over 200 miles an hour, is going to take a lot of air. In fact, the new Bugatti Veyron says that the amount of air it takes in when it's going at its top speed is the amount of air that a human being breathes in about 45 days. It's a lot of air. Well, you also need to get the air out. And if you notice on this car, on the SS version, there's a large exit ramp back here to let a lot of air out. If we move around here, you might notice on the side down here and on the front there's very large vents to bring in a lot of air. These were basically all the same on all the models, changed a little bit on the racing models. And you might notice up here right behind the window on the front door is the EB110 Super Sport. This car actually is a little bit different because it's considered to be a Le Mans version of the Super Sport, which we think there was only 3 that were custom built that had actually 610 horsepower and a variety of other little changes to the engine to make it go even faster. So this is an exceptionally rare car even than an SS. They were going to make 150 of these cars, and they ended up making about 140. They only made 38 of the Super Sports and about 101 of the GT models, plus some other race cars. So this one of 38 cars, one of only 3 that has the Le Mans version on it. You might also notice these large intakes. On the SS, these large intakes replaced glass panels that were back here. There's still a large glass panel over the engine, so you can admire it and see it. But the engine is only maybe 5 inches away from the back of your head, so you certainly get the experience when you're driving. Meanwhile, up at the front of the car, we have the trunk. And there's not much to see up here in terms of space. We have the ABS braking system, the battery, air conditioning, and we have the engine control unit all in the front. No space for your golf clubs, no even overnight bag. And I guess if you stop off and buy a nice bottle of French champagne, you're going to have to keep it inside the car. So this is all basically functional up here in the front and not any space at all for storage. Another interesting feature of the SS version of the EB110 are the very special 7-spoke wheels that you see here. They are BBS wheels made by the BBS company. They have these spokes that really relate back and pay homage to the racing wheels that Ettore Bugatti put on his race cars and on some of his street cars. These wheels have a center unit, much like the EB wheels that he designed, and it has the very large ABS brakes with the Brembo braking calipers. You can also see the drilled disc brakes in the back. What we have here is a 1932 Type 55 Bugatti, and I want to point out the spare tire here on the back because this is the wheel that inspired the wheels that you see on the EB110 Super Sport. You can see there's 8 spokes, single knockoff, and behind the spokes there's also a very interesting piece. This is the brake drum, and the brake drum and the wheel are all one piece. So when you were racing, you could go into the pits, take off the wheel, take off the tire, take off the brake drum, put in brand new brake pads, and have all that back on the road in about 3 to 4 minutes, which was very astounding. Another interesting feature on the back of the wheel, you might see that there is a steel ring on the inside of the brake drum because aluminum is not very good for using for brakes. So they would have this liner that was pressed on the inside, which is a steel liner. You might notice, and I'll point it out here again with my flashlight, is you can see what looks like the Bugatti horseshoe. That's the one that you see that's reflected in all of the radiators around here in all these beautiful Bugattis. Now, I take a little bit exception when people refer to that as a horseshoe. Now, a lot of people think it's a horseshoe because the theme for Bugatti was pur sang, which means thoroughbred, pure blood. And of course, Ettore Bugatti was a horseman. He had a horse Beauregard that he rode down to his chateau and factory every day. So he loved horses, and he actually made a lot of horse-drawn carriages. So he was very much into horses. In fact, when you would go and buy a new car, you would probably stay for a few days at the chateau, and while you're waiting for your car to be completed, you would drive around in these horse-drawn carriages. So you can see why people think this is a horseshoe. However, Ettore's father, a gentleman named Carlo Bugatti, who was a very famous designer himself, he came home one day and said, "I've created the most perfect line in the world," and he called it my Bugatti arch. And he says, that's what is, I think, the most perfect line you could think of. And I believe that Ettore and Jean Bugatti used that theme throughout their cars. Even if you look at this beautiful little car over here, you might see the kind of Bugatti arch up here in the way the car is painted, and also back here in the side. So it is a theme that followed through with Bugatti for a number of years. Well, you might wonder what happened to the EB110 and to Bugatti after about 1996. The company went out of business, and the factory, which was in Campogalliano, is still there, but it's really in a very sad state of affairs. It's pretty much rotting as you look at it. In 1999, however, Volkswagen bought Bugatti, and they reinstituted a new factory, actually called the Atelier, which is back in Molsheim. So you may know that they are still producing cars today, the Veyron, the Saron, the Divo, and they just came out with a new car, as we mentioned earlier, the 110. So that's the future of Bugatti at this point, but this represents a very interesting time period in the entire history of Bugatti. I might also add, just in closing, that you know our museum is full of cars from the 20s and 30s. This car is actually the latest model car. It's a 1994. So it's something that's the latest model, and something still that shows the expanse of Mr. Mullen's collection, going from cars from the 20s all the way up to the 90s. Well, we hope you enjoyed our in-depth look at the 1994 Bugatti EB110 Supersport Le Mans. And we hope that you'll be able to come back and join us again in the future as we feature other cars and try to look at them in depth so that you can get a chance to see under the hood and inside the cars. We would also remind you that we are available to you on the internet, so please visit us at mullenautomotivemuseum.com. And if there's a car that you know about in the museum that you'd like to see us feature, maybe you could suggest that to us and we might be able to do that. Anyway, please again join us here at the museum when you get a chance to come to beautiful downtown Oxnard, California.
Along with our selection of books here at the Mullen Automotive Museum, we also have some wonderful gift items, including mugs for your coffee or your tea, and some beautiful photographs that you can hang on the wall. These are Michael Furman photographs that we've made into wall art. We have a nice selection of them. We have over a dozen of them, and from various eras and different styles and models of automobile, and you can mix them and match them to create a beautiful display in your own home. Along with our wonderful selection of books, you can find these other products in our museum store at mullenautomotivemuseum.com. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you here at the museum sometime soon.